In the modern world, we are constantly bombarded by messages, requests, and advertisements, each vying for a slice of our attention and a portion of our resources. We like to believe that we are rational creatures, making logical decisions based on a careful analysis of the facts before us. However, the reality of the human condition is far more complex, and in many ways far more predictable. Beneath the surface of our conscious awareness, there are powerful psychological currents that pull us in specific directions, often without us even realizing that our choices are being steered by external forces. These forces are not magic. They are the result of evolutionary shortcuts that our brains have developed over millennia to help us navigate an increasingly complicated environment. This book is an exploration into the hidden mechanics of human influence. It is a deep dive into the click-whir responses that dictate much of our social interaction. You will learn that our brains are essentially hardwired to respond to certain triggers in our environment, triggers that can be used by savvy compliance professionals to get us to say yes when we might otherwise have said no. Whether it is a salesperson at a car dealership, a fundraiser for a local charity, or even a child trying to negotiate for an extra hour of television, the principles of persuasion are at work in every corner of our lives. Throughout the following chapters, we will pull back the curtain on these psychological maneuvers. We will examine the core principles that govern human compliance, from the overwhelming need to return a favor to the irrational desire for things that are in short supply. You will discover why we often follow the crowd even when the crowd is heading in the wrong direction, and why a simple uniform can command our absolute obedience. By the end of this journey, you will not only understand how these tactics are used against you, but you will also be equipped with the tools necessary to recognize them in real time and defend your autonomy. This is not just a study of psychology. It is a manual for navigating the social landscape with your eyes wide open, ensuring that your decisions are truly your own. Before we delve into the specific mechanics of persuasion, it is essential to establish a high-level understanding of the landscape we are about to traverse. This book is structured around the fundamental pillars of influence, the psychological shortcuts that our minds use to process information efficiently. In a world where we are overwhelmed with choices, these shortcuts are often necessary for survival. However, they also leave us vulnerable to manipulation. We will explore several key themes that recur throughout the human experience. First, we look at the social glue of reciprocity and commitment, which ensures that our societies function through mutual exchange and personal consistency. Next, we examine the power of perception, looking at how scarcity and censorship can artificially inflate the value of an object or an idea. We will also investigate the social dynamics of the pack, analyzing how we look to others to determine our own behavior, especially when we are uncertain. Finally, we will address the profound impact of authority and similarity, showing how our respect for status and our affinity for those like us can be leveraged to win our compliance. By the time you reach the conclusion, you will have a comprehensive framework for understanding human behavior. You will see the world not as a series of random interactions, but as a complex web of psychological triggers. The goal is to move from a state of passive reaction to one of active awareness. We are setting out to decode the hidden language of yes, providing you with a map to the subconscious mind and the various routes that others take to reach its center. One of the most potent weapons in the arsenal of persuasion is the rule of reciprocation. This rule is deeply embedded in the fabric of human society, dictating that we should try to repay, in kind, what another person has provided for us. This sense of obligation is so powerful that it often overrides our personal feelings toward the individual making the request. We feel a distinct psychological discomfort when we are in someone's debt, and we will often go to great lengths to discharge that debt. However, this noble social instinct can be twisted into a manipulative tactic known as the rejection-then-retreat strategy. To understand how this works, we must look at a personal anecdote shared by the author, Robert Cialdini. While walking down the street, Cialdini was approached by a young Boy Scout. The boy was polite and earnest, and he initially asked if Cialdini would like to purchase a $5 ticket to the upcoming annual Boy Scout circus. Cialdini, having no interest in attending a circus, politely declined the offer. It was at this moment that the boy pivoted. He didn't walk away, instead he made a concession. He said, "Well, if you don't want to buy any tickets, would you at least like to buy some of our chocolate bars? They're only $1 each." Cialdini found himself reaching into his wallet and purchasing 2 chocolate bars, despite the fact that he doesn't even particularly like chocolate. Why did this happen? The boy had retreated from a large request, the $5 ticket, to a smaller one, the $1 chocolate bars. Because the boy had made a concession, Cialdini felt a reciprocal obligation to make a concession of his own. By moving from a no on the expensive item to a yes on the cheaper one, the author was unconsciously matching the boy's perceived sacrifice. The rejection then retreat strategy is doubly effective because it also utilizes the contrast principle. This principle suggests that if 2 items are presented to us one after the other, the difference between the second and the first is magnified in our minds. A $1 chocolate bar seems like a trivial expense when it immediately follows a $5 ticket. If the boy had approached Cialdini and asked for $2 for chocolate bars right away, the author might have easily said no. But because the dollar was contrasted with the $5, it felt like a bargain. This tactic is not just for selling candy. It is a staple in high-stakes negotiations. Labor negotiators often use this by starting with extreme, almost laughable demands. They know these will be rejected. They then retreat to their actual goals, which the other side perceives as a significant concession. The opponent then feels a psychological pressure to meet them halfway. However, there is a caveat. If the initial request is too outrageous or seen as being made in bad faith, the tactic backfires. The other party will feel manipulated rather than obligated, and the negotiation will stall. Perhaps the most dramatic historical example of this strategy is the Watergate scandal. In 1972, the Committee to Re-elect the President, CRP, was presented with a plan by G. Gordon Liddy. Liddy was a man of intense ambition and questionable judgment. His first proposal to the committee was truly preposterous, a $1 million scheme that included kidnapping, mugging, and the use of call girls to compromise political opponents. The committee, led by Jeb Magruder and John Mitchell, rejected this insanity immediately. Liddy, however, was a master of the retreat. He came back with a second, scaled-down version, and finally a third. This third proposal was the plan to burglarize the Democratic National Committee offices at the Watergate complex for a mere $250,000. Compared to the $1 million kidnapping plot, the burglary seemed almost reasonable, a concession on Liddy's part. The committee members felt they had to give Liddy something after turning him down so many times. They approved the $250,000 burglary, a decision that would eventually lead to the catch of the burglars and the historic resignation of President Richard Nixon. They were blinded by the contrast and the need to reciprocate a concession, leading them to approve a disastrously risky plan they would have never considered in isolation. There is a peculiar quirk in human psychology. We value things more the moment they become less available. This is the scarcity principle. It is the reason why limited time only, and while supplies last, are the most overused phrases in the history of marketing. They work because they trigger a fear of loss that is far more motivating than the prospect of gain. We hate to lose our freedom of choice, and when an item becomes scarce, our ability to choose to have it is threatened. To preserve that freedom, we want the item more than ever. The power of scarcity was demonstrated in a fascinating 1982 study involving meat sales. A student of Cialdini's worked with a wholesale meat company to test how scarcity affected purchasing behavior. Customers were divided into 3 groups. The first group received a standard sales pitch. The second group was told that the supply of imported beef was expected to be scarce in the coming month due to weather conditions. The third group was told the same thing about the scarcity, but with an added twist. They were told that this information was exclusive and came from private company sources. The results were staggering. The second group, who heard about the meat scarcity, bought 3 times as much meat as the first group. However, the third group, the ones who were told that the asterisk information about the scarcity was also scarce, bought 6 times as much. This double scarcity effect shows that we don't just value scarce goods, we value scarce information about those goods even more. It makes us feel like we have an inside track, which drives us to act quickly and decisively. There are 2 primary conditions that make scarcity particularly potent. The first is recent scarcity. We want something more if its availability has just recently dropped than if it has always been in short supply. This explains why political revolutions often occur not when conditions are consistently poor, but when they have been improving and then suddenly take a sharp turn for the worse. The people have tasted a better life, and when it is snatched away, their desire for it becomes an uncontrollable fire. The second condition is competition. Nothing gets the human heart racing like the thought of losing a scarce resource to a rival. This is why real estate agents will often tell a hesitant buyer that another couple is very interested and about to make an offer. Whether or not that other couple exists, the mere idea of them creates a feeding frenzy. A classic example of this frenzy involves Barry Diller, the high-powered executive at ABC. In 1973, Diller became embroiled in a bidding war for the television rights to the movie The Poseidon Adventure. This was the first time such rights were being sold in an open bid auction where competitors could see each other's offers. The competitive pressure was so intense that Diller ended up paying $3.3 million for a single broadcast of the film, the highest price ever paid at the time. ABC later calculated they would lose at least $1 million on the deal. Diller, a seasoned and brilliant negotiator, had been swept up in the irrationality of the moment. He wasn't buying the movie, he was fighting to win. His competitors were actually relieved they lost, while Diller vowed never to enter such an auction again. To defend ourselves against this, we must ask, do we want the thing for its utility or just to possess it? Scarcity makes us want to possess. It doesn't make the meat taste better or the movie more entertaining. The scarcity principle doesn't just apply to physical goods. It applies to information and experiences as well. When something is banned or restricted, we find it significantly more attractive. This is often referred to as psychological reactance. When our freedom to engage with something is curtailed, we react against that restriction by desiring the forbidden object or information even more intensely than before. Consider how parents deal with their children. If you tell a toddler they absolutely cannot play with a specific toy, that toy, which may have been ignored for weeks, suddenly becomes the most precious object in the room. This doesn't go away when we reach adulthood. In fact, it becomes more sophisticated. Take the example of censorship. When a book or a movie is banned, the public's desire to see it skyrockets. But more importantly, our perception of the asterisk content asterisk changes. In the 1970s, a study at the University of North Carolina perfectly illustrated this. Students were told that a speech opposing co-ed dorms was going to be banned on campus. Even though the students had not heard a single word of the speech, and many likely disagreed with its premise, they became significantly more sympathetic to the speaker's position simply because the information was being withheld. The act of banning the information gave it an unearned aura of truth and importance. This phenomenon also plays out in our legal system. In many court cases, a judge will instruct a jury to disregard a certain piece of evidence, for example, the fact that a defendant has a large insurance policy that would cover any damages. Research shows that when juries are told to ignore such information, they actually give it more asterisk weight. They award higher damages than they would have if the information hadn't been mentioned at all. The judge's ban on the information makes it seem more relevant and vital to the juror's decision-making process. Even mundane household items can fall under this spell. In Dade County, Florida, The government once passed an ordinance making laundry detergents containing phosphates illegal. The result was not a cleaner environment, but a massive surge in smuggling. Residents began driving to neighboring counties to hoard the good stuff. More interestingly, when surveyed, the residents of Dade County began to claim that phosphate-based detergents were superior in every way. They cleaned better, were gentler on clothes, and even poured more easily. Their perception of the product's quality improved simply because they were no longer allowed to have it. This pining for the prohibited is most famously seen in romantic relationships, leading to what psychologists call the Romeo and Juliet effect. When parents interfere in a teenage romance and try to prevent the couple from seeing each other, it often has the opposite effect. A study of couples in Colorado found that parental interference actually intensified the feelings of love and the desire for marriage between the partners. Like the star-crossed lovers in Shakespeare's play, the barriers erected by authority figures only served to deepen the bond. Conversely, when the parents stopped interfering, the romantic passions often cooled. When we are told no, our brain's immediate response is to find a way to make it a yes. Deep within the human psyche is a powerful drive to be, and to appear, consistent with what we have already done or said. Once we make a choice or take a stand, we encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. Those pressures cause us to respond in ways that justify our earlier decision. Consistency is highly valued in our society. It is associated with personal strength, honesty, and intellectual stability. A person who is inconsistent is often viewed as flighty, two-faced, or even mentally ill. To see this principle in action, we can look at a study conducted by psychologist Thomas Moriarty on a beach in New York. The researchers staged a series of thefts. A research assistant would lay out a towel near a random sunbather, listen to a portable radio for a few minutes, and then go for a walk in the ocean. Then a second researcher, the thief, would come by, grab the radio, and try to hurry away. In the control group, where no interaction took place between the owner and the neighbor, only 20% of the people intervened. However, in the second condition, the owner of the radio made a simple request before leaving: "Please watch my things." This small commitment changed everything. When the theft occurred under these circumstances, 95% of the neighbors became virtual vigilantes. They chased the thief, tackled him, and demanded the radio back. Their desire to be consistent with their verbal commitment to watch the things was so strong that it even overrode their natural concern for their own physical safety. This drive for consistency is what makes commitment the key to influence. If a compliance professional can get you to make a small commitment, they can set the stage for much larger requests later. This is the foot-in-the-door technique. Salespeople are trained to get you to agree to something small, a trial period, a tiny purchase, or even just a statement of agreement. Once you have taken that step, your self-image changes. You are no longer a prospect, you are a customer. To remain consistent with this new self-image, you are much more likely to agree to a larger deal down the line. The most chilling application of this principle was seen during the Korean War. Chinese interrogators used a sophisticated system of commitment and consistency to get American prisoners of war POWs to collaborate. They didn't use torture. Instead, they used small, seemingly harmless requests. They would ask a prisoner to make a mildly anti-American or pro-communist statement, such as, "The United States is not perfect," or, "In a communist country, unemployment is not a problem." Once these statements were signed and written down, the interrogators would use them. They might read the statement over the camp's public address system or show it to other prisoners. The prisoner, having committed his thoughts to paper, now felt a psychological pressure to be consistent with what he had written. His fellow prisoners began to see him as a collaborator, and soon he began to see himself that way too. By adjusting his self-image to match his public commitment, he became increasingly helpful to his captors. This demonstrates the incredible power of the written word. There is something about signing your name to a statement that makes it nearly impossible to retreat from. Why is it that groups, from primitive tribes in the jungles of Africa to elite fraternities on American college campuses, insist on brutal and degrading initiation rituals? We hear stories of hell weeks involving sleep deprivation, physical pain, and public humiliation. Despite constant pressure from university administrations and the public to end these practices, they persist. The reason is rooted in a psychological truth. The harder we have to work to get something, the more we value it. Groups that require a high price of admission are often the most cohesive. When a new member goes through a painful or difficult ordeal to join a group, they cannot easily tell themselves they did it for no reason. To justify the suffering they endured, they must convince themselves that the group is incredibly special and worth the effort. This creates a level of commitment and loyalty that could never be achieved through a simple sign-up sheet. Interestingly, these groups often resist efforts to replace their brutal rituals with something productive, like community service. You might think a fraternity would be happy to have its pledges paint a local hospital instead of being paddled, but they almost always refuse. Why? Because community service provides an external justification for the behavior. A pledge could say, "I did that because it was for the good of the community." The groups want the members to make an inner choice asterisk. They want the only possible justification for the suffering to be the value of the group itself. Research has consistently shown that choices made from within, without the presence of strong external rewards or threats, lead to a much more permanent change in attitude. Compliance professionals use a variation of this called the lowball technique. Imagine you are shopping for a car. A dealer offers you an incredibly low price, perhaps $1,000 below the competition. You decide to buy. You fill out the paperwork, take a test drive, and start imagining the car in your driveway. You've made the inner choice to buy this specific car. During this time, you unknowingly grow your own legs to support the decision. You think about the great gas mileage, the sleek color, and how much your neighbors will like it. Then, at the very last second, the dealer discovers an error. "I'm so sorry," he says, "but the sales manager won't approve the price. We have to charge you the standard $1,000 more." Most people still go through with the purchase. Even though the original reason for the purchase, the low price, has been removed, the new reasons you came up with, the mileage, the color, are still there. You want to remain consistent with your initial decision to buy. To protect yourself from the lowball, you must ask yourself one simple question. Knowing what I know now, if I could go back in time, would I still make this choice? If the answer is no, you must be prepared to walk away, regardless of the effort you've already put in. Have you ever sat through a sitcom and found yourself annoyed by the laugh track? Most people claim to hate canned laughter, calling it intrusive and phony. Yet, television executives continue to use it. Why? Because it works. Experiments have shown that the use of a laugh track causes audiences to laugh longer and more often when humorous material is presented, and to rate the material as funnier. This is the principle of social proof. Social proof states that we determine what is correct by finding out what other people think is correct. We view a behavior as more correct in a given situation to the degree that we see others performing it. Whether we are deciding what to wear, how fast to drive on a certain stretch of highway, or how to eat the chicken at a formal dinner, the actions of those around us are vital in defining the right move. This is why bartenders salt their tip jars with a few dollars at the beginning of the night. It suggests to customers that tipping is the standard behavior. It's why advertisers love to tell us their product is the fastest growing or best selling. They don't have to convince us the product is good. They just have to show us that everyone else is buying it. Social proof is most powerful under two conditions: uncertainty and similarity. When we are unsure of ourselves, or when a situation is ambiguous, we are most likely to look to and accept the actions of others as correct. This leads to a phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance. A tragic and famous example of this is the 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City. Kitty was attacked and stabbed over a period of 35 minutes outside her apartment. 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens watched or heard the attack from the safety of their windows, yet not one of them called the police or went to her aid until it was too late. The media at the time portrayed the witnesses as cold and heartless. However, psychologists believe the bystander effect was at play. In a crowded environment, personal responsibility is diffused. Everyone thinks, someone else will call. Furthermore, because no one else was reacting, each witness looked at the others and concluded that since nobody was doing anything, it must not be a real emergency. They were all looking for social proof, but because everyone was trying to appear calm and unruffled, the proof they found was that inaction was the appropriate response. If you ever find yourself in an emergency in a public place, you cannot rely on the crowd to help you spontaneously. To break the spell of social proof, you must be specific. Don't just yell help. Instead, point to one person and give them a direct command. You, in the blue jacket, call 911. I need an ambulance. By singling out an individual, you remove the uncertainty and place the burden of responsibility squarely on their shoulders. They will almost always respond. We have established that we look to others to guide our behavior, but we don't look to just asterisk anyone asterisk. We are most likely to follow the lead of someone who is similar to us. This is why teenagers are so heavily influenced by their peers rather than their parents, and why advertisers use regular people in their commercials. If a woman who looks like a typical suburban mom tells us that a certain laundry detergent is the best, other suburban moms are likely to believe her. However, the power of similarity has a much darker side. One of the most startling examples of this is the Werther effect. In the late 1700s, Johann von Goethe published a novel called The Sorrows of Young Werther in which the protagonist commits suicide. The book was a sensation, but it also sparked a wave of copycat suicides across Europe. This phenomenon was eventually studied by sociologist David Phillips, who found a modern-day equivalent. Phillips discovered that whenever a front-page suicide story appears in the news, the number of people who die in commercial airline and automobile crashes increases dramatically in the following week. At first, this seems nonsensical, but Phillips argued that these accidents are often disguised suicides. People who are already troubled read about a suicide and decide to end their lives, but many want to protect their family's reputation or ensure insurance payouts, so they make their death look like an accident. Crucially, the similarity rule holds true here as well. If a suicide victim is young, young people are the ones who start crashing their cars. If the victim is older, then older drivers are the ones involved in the subsequent accidents. Phillips' research suggests that every highly publicized suicide story effectively kills 58 people who would have otherwise continued living. They see someone like themselves taking a certain path, and they follow it to its tragic conclusion. In the world of commerce, this principle is used to manipulate our purchasing decisions. We see man on the street interviews where seemingly random people praise a product. Often these are actors following a script, but the appearance of similarity is enough to trigger our compliance. We think, if that person who is just like me likes this product, then I will too. To defend against this, we must become experts at spotting counterfeit social proof. When you see a commercial featuring regular people, look closely. Is the dialogue too perfect? Is the situation staged? When we realize that the social proof is being faked, we should not only ignore the message but also feel a sense of righteous indignation. We should consciously decide to boycott companies that try to trick us with phony similarity. By being alert to these manipulations, we can ensure that we are following our own path, rather than a mirror image created by a marketing department. From the moment we are born, we are trained to obey authority. Our parents, our teachers, our doctors, and our religious leaders all represent figures of wisdom and power. In most cases, this is a good thing. Society would collapse into chaos if we didn't respect the rules and the people who enforce them. However, our obedience to authority is often so deeply ingrained that we stop thinking for ourselves. We enter a state of click-work compliance, where we obey a command simply because it comes from a perceived authority figure, regardless of how senseless or harmful that command might be. The most famous study on this phenomenon was conducted by Stanley Milgram at Yale University in the 1960s. Milgram wanted to see how far ordinary people would go in inflicting pain on another person if ordered to do so by an authority figure. In the experiment, a teacher, the volunteer was told to administer electric shocks to a learner, an actor, every time they got a question wrong. The shocks ranged from slight shock to danger, severe shock, and finally XXX. As the learner screamed in feigned agony and eventually went silent, the authority figure in the white lab coat simply told the teacher to continue. To the horror of the observers, two-thirds of the participants continued to administer the shocks all the way to the maximum level, simply because they were told to. They weren't monsters. They were ordinary people who were unable to defy the pressure of authority. The danger of blind obedience isn't just found in psychology labs. It happens in real-world settings every day. Consider the story of a nurse who received a doctor's order for a patient with an earache in his right ear. The doctor wrote, "Administer medicine in our ear." The nurse, misreading the instruction, proceeded to put the ear drops in the patient's rear, his anus. Neither the nurse nor the patient questioned the logic of this, because the doctor was the authority, and authority negates independent thought. We are also susceptible to the symbols of authority. We don't need to see a diploma to believe someone is a professor. We just need to hear them called professor. Studies have shown that we actually perceive people with high-status titles as being physically taller than they actually are. Clothing is another powerful symbol. A well-tailored suit or a uniform can command respect and compliance even if the person wearing it is a complete fraud. Con artists have known this for centuries, using the trappings of authority, priests' robes, police uniforms, or expensive cars, to bypass our critical thinking. Think of the actor Robert Young, who played the famous Dr. Marcus Welby on television. For years, he was the spokesperson for Sanka Coffee. He wasn't a doctor, he just played one on TV, yet people trusted his medical advice about caffeine because he carried the aura of the character. To protect ourselves, we must ask two questions when confronted by authority. Is this person truly an expert in this specific area? And how honest can we expect them to be? A waiter may be an authority on the menu, but he also has an interest in selling you the most expensive bottle of wine. By separating the symbol of authority from the reality of the situation, we can regain our ability to think for ourselves. As we conclude our journey through the hidden corridors of the human mind, it becomes clear that we are far less in control of our decisions than we would like to believe. The principles we have explored, reciprocity, scarcity, consistency, social proof, similarity, and authority, are the fundamental gears that drive human interaction. They are the shortcuts that allow us to function in a complex world, but they are also the levers that can be pulled by those who wish to influence us for their own gain. The goal of this exploration has not been to make you cynical, but to make you aware. Knowledge is the ultimate defense. When you feel that sudden, inexplicable urge to buy a product because it's almost gone, or when you find yourself agreeing to a request you'd rather decline, pause for a moment. Recognize the psychological trigger at work. Is it the contrast principle? Is it a sense of unearned obligation? Is it the pressure of the crowd? By naming the tactic, you strip it of its power. You move from the click-whir automatic response to a state of conscious deliberation. The most important takeaway is this: you have the right to say no. You have the right to change your mind. You have the right to ignore the social proof of a laugh track and the authority of a lab coat. In the future, when you are faced with a master of persuasion, remember the Boy Scout and the chocolate bars, the bidding war of Barry Diller, and the silent witnesses to Kitty Genovese. Use these stories as a shield. The world is full of people trying to pull your strings. Now that you can see the strings, you are finally free to dance to your own tune. True autonomy begins with the understanding of our own vulnerabilities, and with that understanding, you can navigate the social landscape with confidence, integrity, and a clear, independent mind. For more book summaries for free, install Zyroverse.